A 7-year-old girl held up a crumpled paper sign that said, "Help me," to a group of bikers at a red light, and what they discovered in her basement would lead to the biggest rescue operation their town had ever seen. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The red light at Oak Street and Highway 41 lasted exactly 90 seconds. That's all the time Emma had to save not just herself, but 12 other children who were counting on her to be brave. She pressed her small face against the car window, holding up the sign she'd written with a broken crayon on the back of a McDonald's receipt. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely keep it steady. Marcus "Hammer" Rodriguez was leading his motorcycle club back from a charity ride when they stopped at that fateful red light. 25 members of the Iron Wolves MC, all in formation, engines rumbling like thunder. Marcus noticed the little girl immediately. Kids usually waved at bikers or hid behind their parents, but this one was different. She was desperate. The sign said, "Help me," in shaky letters. Below that, she'd drawn what looked like a basement with stick figures inside. Marcus's blood ran cold. He'd seen scared kids before in his 20 years of riding, but something about this girl's eyes told him this was life or death. Emma watched the biggest, scariest-looking man she'd ever seen climb off his motorcycle. His arms were covered in tattoos, his beard was wild, and his leather vest had patches she couldn't read. But when he walked toward the car, Emma didn't feel afraid of him. She felt hope. The driver of the car, a well-dressed woman in her 40s, rolled down her window with a bright smile. "Can I help you?" she asked in a voice sweet as honey. Marcus kept his eyes on the little girl. "Your daughter okay?" "Oh, she's just playing games. You know how kids are with their imagination." But Emma was shaking her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. She pointed down, mouthing the word basement over and over. The light turned green. The woman's smile never wavered as she said, "We really must be going. Have a blessed day." That's when Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stood directly in front of the car, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, and refused to move. Behind him, 24 other bikers turned off their engines and dismounted. Cars began honking, but the Iron Wolves formed a wall. "Ma'am," Marcus said calmly, "I'm going to need you to pull over to that parking lot right there." The woman's sweet smile finally cracked. "You have no right to stop me. I'll call the police." "Please do," Marcus replied. "In fact, I'll call them myself." What happened next was pure chaos. The woman tried to drive around Marcus, but the bikers had surrounded the car completely. Emma was pounding on the window now, screaming words that made every biker's blood boil. "She's not my mom! The others are in the basement! Please help us!" The woman grabbed Emma's arm and yanked her back from the window so hard that several bikers stepped forward with clenched fists. But Marcus held up his hand. They needed to do this right, by the book, or this little girl might disappear forever. Officer Patricia Chen arrived within 3 minutes, which was a record for their small town. She knew Marcus from his legitimate job as a high school shop teacher and trusted his instincts. When she approached the car, the woman had transformed back into the perfect picture of suburban motherhood. "Officer, these men are harassing me and my daughter. We're just trying to get home from her dance recital." Officer Chen looked at Emma. "Sweetie, is this your mom?" Emma's whole body was trembling, but she found her voice. "No, my name is Emma Walker. I've been gone for 2 months. My real mom is Jennifer Walker, and our phone number is 555-0123. The color drained from the woman's face as Officer Chen's hand moved to her radio. Within minutes, their quiet intersection was swarming with police cars. The woman was identified as Linda Patterson, a name that would soon become infamous. She lived in a house just 10 minutes away, a normal-looking home with a white picket fence and rose bushes. But Emma kept pointing down and saying basement with increasing urgency. Marcus refused to leave. The entire Iron Wolves MC followed the police convoy to that house, parking their bikes on the street like sentinels. What they found in that basement would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. The basement door was hidden behind a false wall in the pantry. Officer Chen went down first, and her scream brought everyone running. 12 children, ages 5 to 14, were being held in makeshift cells. They were alive, but in conditions that made hardened officers weep. Emma had been the oldest, the one Linda Patterson trusted enough to take on errands, always with threats about what would happen to the younger ones if she tried to escape. But Emma was smart. She'd been planning for weeks, waiting for the right moment. When she saw those bikers at the red light, something inside told her these were people who would help. She was right. The rescue operation was unlike anything their town had ever seen. Ambulances lined up to transport the children to the hospital. Parents who had been searching for months or even years got phone calls that made them collapse with relief. The Iron Wolves refused to leave, standing guard at the hospital to make sure every child was safe and accounted for. Emma's reunion with her real mother was captured by news cameras, but the little girl had eyes only for Marcus. She ran to him first, wrapping her small arms around his neck as he knelt down. "You saw my sign," she whispered. "You stopped for me." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. "You were brave enough to ask for help. That's what saved everyone." But the ET story was far from over. Linda Patterson wasn't working alone. During interrogation, she revealed a network of people involved in taking these children. Some were being prepared to be sold to buyers overseas. Emma's quick thinking hadn't just saved the 12 children in that basement, it exposed an entire trafficking ring. The Iron Wolves MC did something unprecedented. They organized a 24/7 protection detail for every rescued child and their family until all the criminals were caught. Bikers who looked like they ate nails for breakfast were seen walking kids to school, sitting in hospital waiting rooms, and standing guard at therapy appointments. What happens next reveals a dark truth about how predators operate in plain sight and shows why sometimes the most unlikely heroes are exactly who children need. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Linda Patterson had been a respected member of the community for 15 years. She volunteered at the local church, ran bake sales for the elementary school, and was even on the board of a children's charity. It was the perfect cover. She knew which children were vulnerable, whose parents worked long hours, who didn't have strong family support. She studied them like a predator studies prey. Emma had been taken from a park where she'd wandered just a little too far from her mother while chasing a butterfly. 2 months of captivity had taught her to be silent, obedient, and watchful. But they'd underestimated her intelligence and her fierce protectiveness of the younger children. In the basement, Emma had become their leader, their big sister, their hope. She told them stories to help them sleep, shared her food with the smallest ones, and held them when they cried for their parents. She memorized every detail about each child so she could tell the police if she ever got the chance. The little boy named Tyler was only 5 and missed his dog. Sarah, age 7, was allergic to peanuts, something their captors didn't care about. Miguel, age 9, had diabetes and needed insulin that Linda was rationing dangerously. Each child had a story, a family, a life that had been stolen. When the trials began, Emma became the star witness. At 7 years old, she sat in that courtroom with more courage than most adults could muster. Marcus and the Iron Wolves were there every single day, a wall of leather and solidarity that made Emma feel safe enough to speak her truth. She identified 6 other people involved in the ring, including a pediatric nurse who had been marking vulnerable children during routine checkups, a school bus driver who reported children's schedules, and horrifyingly, a social worker who had been removing children from safe homes to feed into the trafficking network. The prosecutor asked Emma how she stayed strong enough to protect the other children and plan their escape. Her answer made the entire courtroom weep. "My daddy taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you're terrified. I was scared every day, but I knew those little kids needed me to be their brave person." Her father had died in a car accident just 6 months before she was taken. In her darkest moments in that basement, she would talk to him in her mind, asking for strength. She believes he sent those bikers to that red light at exactly the right moment. The Iron Wolves MC transformed after that day. They created a program called Guardian Wolves specifically to help endangered children. They partnered with schools to teach kids about personal safety, worked with law enforcement on missing children cases, and established safe houses for families in crisis. Marcus left his teaching job to run the program full-time. He said finding Emma changed his understanding of what strength really meant. That little girl showed more courage with a crayon and a piece of paper than most people show in their entire lives, he told reporters. But the most beautiful part of this story happened 1 year later. All 13 children and their families gathered for a reunion. They met at a park, the same one where Emma had been taken, reclaiming that space with joy instead of fear. The Iron Wolves provided security, but also bounce houses, face painting, and enough barbecue to feed an army. Emma had grown taller and stronger, but her eyes still carried wisdom beyond her years. She'd started speaking at schools about recognizing danger and asking for help. Her message was simple but powerful. Bad people look for children who are afraid to speak up. Be loud, be bold, trust your instincts, and remember, help can come from unexpected places. Each of the rescued children was healing in their own way. Tyler had been reunited with his dog and was learning to trust adults again. Sarah was back in school and excelling. Miguel was healthy and had become an advocate for diabetic children. They all carried scars, invisible but real, but they also carried the knowledge that they had survived something terrible together. Linda Patterson was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The network she'd been part of crumbled as more victims came forward, empowered by Emma's bravery. Dozens of children were rescued across 3 states because one little girl decided to make a sign with a broken crayon. The intersection of Oak Street and Highway 41 now has a different meaning for the Iron Wolves MC. They still ride past it regularly, and Marcus always looks at that spot where Emma held up her sign. He installed a small plaque there that simply says, "Courage comes in all sizes." Emma's mother, Jennifer, became an advocate for missing children and worked closely with the Guardian Wolves program. She never forgot the moment she saw her daughter again, surrounded by leather-clad bikers who had become angels in disguise. "They gave me back my baby," she said. "They gave 13 families back their whole world." The partnership between the bikers and law enforcement became a model for other communities. Officer Chen, promoted to detective after the case, regularly spoke at conferences about the importance of taking every sign seriously, no matter how small or who reports it. "A child's cry for help can come in many forms," she would say. "Our job is to listen." The investigation that followed Emma's rescue uncovered shocking details about how the trafficking ring operated. They discovered Linda Patterson had been using her position at the children's charity to identify vulnerable families. She would befriend single mothers, offer to babysit, and slowly gain their trust. Her basement had been specially constructed with soundproofing and hidden ventilation systems. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was a carefully planned operation years in the making. During the investigation, police found detailed records Linda had kept on each child. She had files with their medical information, family schedules, and psychological profiles. She knew exactly which buttons to push to keep each child compliant, but she hadn't counted on Emma's intelligence and determination. Emma had secretly taught the younger children a counting game that was actually a code. Each number represented a different need or danger. The other captors thought the children were just playing, but Emma was gathering intelligence and keeping track of everyone's health and mental state. She knew which children were getting sick, who needed extra food, who was losing hope. One of the most haunting discoveries was a calendar Emma had scratched into the wall behind a loose board. She'd marked each day of captivity, not just for herself, but with symbols for each child's condition. Good days had stars, bad days had clouds, and the worst days had thunderbolts. The calendar showed her incredible strength, but also the deteriorating conditions as time went on. The trial lasted 6 months and became one of the most watched cases in the state's history. Emma's testimony was so powerful that several jurors had to be excused when they couldn't stop crying. She described not just the physical conditions, but the psychological torture Linda used. The woman would tell the children their parents had stopped looking for them, that they'd been replaced by new children, that no one missed them. But Emma never believed it. She told the other children every night, "Your parents love you. They're looking for you right now. We just have to stay strong until they find us." She became their counselor, their protector, their hope in human form. At 7 years old, she held together 12 broken spirits with nothing but stories and stolen hugs. Marcus testified about what he saw at that red light. His voice broke when he described Emma's face pressed against the window. "I've seen fear before," he said. "I've seen it in combat, on the streets, in 1,000 different places, but I've never seen fear mixed with that kind of determination." That little girl wasn't just scared for herself. She was carrying the weight of 12 other lives. The Iron Wolves had to deal with their own trauma from the rescue. Several members needed counseling after seeing the conditions in that basement. Big, tough bikers who'd been in bar fights and seen violence were brought to their knees by what had been done to these children. It changed them fundamentally as a club. They started training programs for other motorcycle clubs across the country. The Guardian Wolves Protocol became a nationwide network of bikers trained to recognize and respond to children in danger. They worked with truckers, delivery drivers, and anyone else who spent time on the roads where predators often transported victims. Emma kept in touch with all the children from the basement. They called themselves the Basement Brave, and though they wished they'd never had to earn that title, they wore it with pride. They had survived because they had each other and because Emma refused to let them give up hope. At age 10, Emma received a citizenship award from the mayor. She stood at the podium, still small for her age but mighty in spirit, and said, "People ask me how I knew those bikers would help. The truth is, I didn't know. But my daddy always said that sometimes the people who look the scariest on the outside have the biggest hearts on the inside." He was right. Marcus stood in the back of the room, tears streaming down his weathered face. The other Iron Wolves tried to pretend they weren't crying too, but there wasn't a dry eye among them. They'd spent years being feared and misunderstood, but one brave little girl had seen past their appearance to their hearts. The Guardian Wolves program has since helped recover over 200 missing children. Each rescue starts the same way. Someone notices something wrong and decides to act. Emma taught them all that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather vests and ride motorcycles, and sometimes they're 7-year-old girls with broken crayons and unbreakable spirits. Emma is a teenager now, focused on her studies and dreaming of becoming a detective. She still has nightmares sometimes, still checks locks twice before bed, still feels safest when she hears motorcycle engines in the distance. But she's not defined by what happened to her. She's defined by what she did about it. The ripple effects of Emma's bravery spread far beyond their small town. Her story inspired changes in legislation about how missing children cases were handled. The Emma Protocol required immediate multi-agency response to any credible sign of child endangerment, no matter how that sign was delivered. A crayon on a receipt had changed law enforcement procedures nationwide. 3 years after the rescue, a documentary filmmaker approached the families about telling their story. At first, they were hesitant. The trauma was still fresh, the healing still ongoing. But Emma, now 10 years old, had something to say about it. "If our story can help even one child get home, then we need to tell it," she said with wisdom beyond her years. The documentary revealed details that hadn't been made public during the trial. One of the most chilling was that Linda Patterson had been planning to move the children out of state within days. She'd already arranged buyers and transportation. Emma's decision to act when she did literally came down to hours. If she had waited for another opportunity, all 13 children might have vanished forever. The film crew interviewed each of the Iron Wolves who'd been at that intersection. Rodriguez Tank Gonzalez, the club's sergeant-at-arms, admitted he'd initially wanted to pull the woman from the car immediately. "Marcus kept us in check," he said. "He knew we had to do it right, legal and proper, or that little girl might disappear into the system. His calm head saved those kids as much as Emma's bravery did." Another biker, Tommy Wizard Chen, revealed he'd been a victim of abuse as a child. "Nobody helped me," he said, tears in his eyes. "I promised myself that if I ever saw a kid in trouble, I'd be the adult I needed when I was young." Emma's sign wasn't just asking for help. It was giving us a chance to be the heroes we wished we'd had. The documentary also followed the other 12 children's recovery journeys. Miguel, the diabetic boy, had nearly died in that basement. His parents had sued the healthcare system that employed the nurse who'd marked him as vulnerable. The lawsuit exposed massive security failures in protecting patient information and led to nationwide healthcare reforms. Sarah, the girl with peanut allergies, developed a form of therapy using art to help other traumatized children. Despite being only 10 years old when the documentary was filmed, she'd already helped dozens of kids express feelings they couldn't put into words. Her therapist said Sarah's experience had given her an almost supernatural ability to connect with suffering children. Tyler, the youngest at 5 during the captivity, had the longest road to recovery. He didn't speak for 6 months after the rescue. The only person he would interact with was his dog and, surprisingly, Marcus. The big biker would visit Tyler every week, just sitting quietly while the boy played. One day, Tyler finally spoke. "Are the bad people gone?" Marcus promised him they were, and slowly, word by word, Tyler came back to the world. The documentary revealed that Emma had actually made 2 previous attempts to signal for help. Once, she'd tried to slip a note to a grocery store clerk, but Linda had caught her and the punishment had been severe. Another time, she'd tried to mouth, "Help me," to a woman at a gas station, but the woman had just smiled and waved. These failures hadn't broken Emma's spirit. They'd made her more determined to find the right moment and the right people. The filmmakers uncovered something beautiful about that fateful day at the intersection. 3 different people had called 911 about the bikers threatening a woman and child. But Officer Chen had been specifically dispatched because she knew Marcus personally. She'd taken his shop class in high school 15 years earlier. He'd been the teacher who helped her decide to become a cop. The universe had aligned perfectly to save 13 children. Every year on the anniversary of the rescue, the Iron Wolves organize a ride. Hundreds of bikers from across the country come to participate. They ride past that intersection, past the house with the hidden basement, and end at the park where healing replaced hurt. It's a reminder that evil exists in the world, but so does good. And sometimes good wins because a little girl was brave enough to hold up a sign. The last thing Linda Patterson said at her sentencing was that she never thought anyone would believe a child over a respectable adult. She was wrong. She underestimated the power of truth written in crayon, the instincts of a biker who knew something was wrong, and the courage of a little girl who refused to let 12 other children disappear into darkness. Emma keeps that original "Help Me" sign in a frame in her bedroom. It's a reminder of the worst day of her life, but also the day she saved 12 other children. It's a reminder that being small doesn't mean being powerless, that asking for help is the bravest thing you can do, and that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. The basement, where 13 children were held, has been filled with concrete. The house was demolished, but on that spot now grows a garden, tended by the families whose children came home. 13 trees grow there, one for each child who survived, with a plaque that reads, "Where darkness once lived, light now grows." And at the intersection of Oak Street and Highway 41, if you know where to look, you can still see Iron Wolves members pause at that red light. They're watching, always watching, for any child who might need help. Because once you've seen courage like Emma's, you can never stop looking for it in others. The aftermath of the rescue revealed just how sophisticated the trafficking ring had been. Federal investigators found connections to similar operations in 6 other states. Linda Patterson had been middle management in a network that generated millions of dollars selling children. The money trail led to offshore accounts, cryptocurrency exchanges, and seemingly legitimate businesses that were actually fronts. One of the most disturbing discoveries was a training manual found on Linda's computer. It detailed how to select victims, how to break their spirits gradually, and how to maintain a perfect public facade. The manual referred to children as inventory and had cold, calculating strategies for every scenario. But nowhere in that manual was there a contingency for a child like Emma, who refused to be broken. The rescue also exposed massive failures in the EATS system meant to protect children. Several of the victims had been reported missing in different jurisdictions, but poor communication between agencies had prevented anyone from connecting the dots. Emma's case led to the creation of a unified national database for missing children, something child advocates had been fighting for decades to achieve. 6 months after the documentary aired, something remarkable happened. Marcus received a letter from a teenager in Oregon who had seen the film. She was being held in a similar situation and had managed to steal a phone. She'd remembered Marcus's name and found the Iron Wolves website. Within hours, she and 4 other children were rescued from a basement in Portland. Emma's bravery had created a ripple effect, saving children thousands of miles away. The Guardian Wolves program expanded internationally. Motorcycle clubs in Canada, Australia, and across Europe adopted the protocols. They all wore a special patch, a wolf's head with a child's handprint on it, designed by Emma herself. The patch meant that child was under the protection of every biker who wore their colors. Marcus left teaching entirely to run the foundation full-time. He traveled the country speaking at schools, teaching children about personal safety and the importance of trusting their instincts. He always ended his presentations the same way. Help doesn't always look like you expect it to. Sometimes it wears a leather vest and rides a Harley. The foundation also created a scholarship program for the 13 rescued children. All education expenses would be covered through graduate school if they chose. The money came from motorcycle clubs across the country who held fundraising rides. Tough bikers who looked like they'd rob you blind were selling cookies and washing cars to ensure these kids had every opportunity to build beautiful lives. Emma's mother, Jennifer, became a different person after getting her daughter back. The helplessness she'd felt during those 2 months transformed into fierce advocacy. She worked with legislators to pass Emma's law, which made it a federal crime to transport children for trafficking purposes and increased penalties for anyone who failed to report suspected child abuse. The law had teeth because of one particular provision Jennifer had fought for. Any professional who worked with children, teachers, doctors, coaches, who failed to report signs of abuse would lose their license permanently. No second chances, no excuses. The pediatric nurse who had marked vulnerable children lost not just her license but served 15 years in federal prison. 10 years after the rescue, the town held a ceremony to honor everyone involved. Emma, now 17, stood at the podium as a confident young woman. She'd grown tall and strong, with eyes that still held that fierce determination Marcus had seen through the car window a decade earlier. She thanked the Iron Wolves, Officer Chen, the prosecutors, and the therapists who'd helped them all heal. But her most powerful words were for other children who might be in danger. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. Someone is looking for you right now. Be smart, be careful, but when you see your chance, take it. Trust your instincts about who can help you. And remember, courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done anyway. The ceremony ended with a surprise. 13 motorcycles roared into the town square, each one carrying one of the rescued children, now teenagers. They'd all learned to ride, with their parents' nervous permission, and had formed their own group, the Young Wolves. They weren't a motorcycle club in the traditional sense, but a support network for survivors of trafficking. Together they rode to that intersection where it all began. The traffic light had been replaced with a modern signal, but everything else looked the same. They stopped their bikes right where the Iron Wolves had formed their wall 10 years earlier. Emma removed her helmet and looked up at the light, now green. 10 years ago, this light was red for 90 seconds, she said to the gathered crowd. 90 seconds that changed 13 lives. It reminds me that heroes don't need hours or days to act. Sometimes all it takes is seeing someone who needs help and deciding to stop. The Young Wolves program became a model for survivor support nationwide. Who better to help traumatized children than those who had lived through it and come out the other side? Emma and the others spoke at conferences, worked with law enforcement, and most importantly, showed other victims that there was life after trauma. Good, beautiful, meaningful life. Marcus, now in his 50s, still rides every day. He carries a photo in his wallet, not of Emma's rescue, but of her college acceptance letter. She'd been accepted to study criminal justice, surprising no one. At the bottom of the letter, she'd written, "None of this without you." E. The blue house on Maple Street where everything happened was eventually purchased by the Guardian Wolves Foundation. They turned it into a training center where law enforcement, social workers, and volunteers learned to recognize signs of trafficking. The basement where 13 children had suffered became a classroom where people learned to prevent such suffering. Every training session begins the same way. They show a photo of Emma's handwritten sign, "Help me," in shaky crayon letters. Then, Marcus tells the story of a 7-year-old girl who saved 12 other children with nothing but courage and a piece of paper. He always ends with the same words. Evil counts on good people doing nothing. Emma counted on good people doing something. Be the person a scared child can count on. The impact continues to ripple outward. Every year, the Guardian Wolves get calls from children who remember Emma's story and reach out for help. Some hold up signs at red lights, others slip notes to bikers at gas stations. A few have even walked into motorcycle clubhouses, knowing they'll find protection there. The network saves an average of 50 children per year, all because one little girl refused to give up. Emma still keeps in touch with all 12 children she protected in that basement. They're spread across the country now, living their lives, but they gather every year on the anniversary, not to relive the trauma, but to celebrate survival. They call it Freedom Day, and it's become a celebration of resilience, courage, and the power of refusing to give up hope. Thank you for listening to Emma's incredible story of bravery. If this touched your heart, please subscribe and click on one of the 2 stories on your screen to hear more amazing tales of unexpected heroes.